Welcome to the Prosthetics and Orthotics podcast with Brent Wright and Joris Peels. Hi everyone, this is Joris Peels, and this is another episode of the Prosthetics and Orthotics podcast with Brent Wright. How you doing, Brent?
Hey, doing well, Joris. Good to be back on, and man, we've got some interesting news this week.
Yeah, so you didn't want a guest. What you wanted was to talk about this news, and there's something about hangers or something. What's going on?
Yeah, so we had talked about Hanger going private, no longer being a publicly traded company, and Hanger is making some very interesting acquisitions to help bolster their portfolio, and they just acquired a company called Surestep that specifically works with pediatric orthoses. And then there was kind of a parent company called Transcend Orthotics and Prosthetics that did a lot of mobile stuff in the Midwest. And Hanger also acquired that. So those are two very interesting plays that I think is a good move for their portfolio, but can also cause some pause for the independent companies because now you have not only more competition that is the quote unquote the big guy. The Hanger is one of the largest companies that provide orthotics and prosthetics, but also you now have a manufacturer that you're supporting that to manufacture your orthotic devices for pediatrics. And so essentially you're sending your competition your work to be fabricated. And I know there's people that have different opinions about that. So that's what I'd like to just hop into today.
Okay. I think this really complete dovetails super nicely with the last discussion we had about Hanger. Because like our opinion then was, if I'm correctly recalling it, was okay, there's this kind of mom and pop kind of setup for a lot of the orthotics and prosthetics industry. It's really small companies, really local. And they may have a couple of sites, but typically it'd be like one site, like maybe, right? It's super fragmented landscape. All these guys do a lot of their fabrication. And what we were thinking of then is, okay, wait a minute. What would happen if somebody kind of McDonald's-ifies or Starbucks-ifies this experience, right? What happens if somebody like outsources everything to one central manufacturer and, takes over this whole business? And we've discussed this a couple of times. This keeps coming back. And then what happens if these guys start making their own devices, make their own instruments, make their own components, right? And market them. And it seems like this is his Hanger strategy, right? Am I just like too naive here, or what do you think?
Well, I think what's interesting about Hanger is that they've been very prosthetic focused for a very long time. But in volume, the orthotic market is massive in the United States. And then the pediatric orthotic market is also very massive, but the margins are thinner. So you have to make it up in volume. Well, Hanger has never been known as one of the best pediatric practices in the United States. Even when I was a resident for Hanger back in the early 2000s, it was always very prosthetic heavy, and you didn't really specialize in the orthotic side of things. It was just kind of one of those things that kind of came along for the ride. But, as they've gone private, I think they're also seeing the value in reaching the people that need orthotic devices. And then this niche of pediatric orthotic devices in Surestep is very interesting. But then there's also another niche that they acquired as part of the whole deal, which is Transcend, which they're mobile, which means that they have vans that they go to people's houses, appointments, and all that. And so those are all things that Hanger really would have had a weakness in. So they are not necessarily cutting a corner, but they're investing into experience they don't have, which I think is very wise.
Okay, yeah, and they're fleshing out their portfolio generally. I mean, I think to me the Transcend thing seems super logical, right? Look, guys, we're going to set up 4 big manufacturing sites in the U.S. Maybe. What I would do if we're looking at this purely economically, let's also set up a manufacturing site in Costa Rica or India or whatever to do a lot of the work, right? and let's set up a manufacturing site and make all of our metal components, right? There's one central one. And then the obvious thing is to have like a bunch of regional actual offices, and then to do this van thing, which you guys do as well at East Point, right? Do this
Yep.
van, reach a ton more people. So the Transcend thing seems super logical. It's a reach play, it's a volume play. That's their go to market essentially, right?
Right, right. And the other part of this is they have a lot of traditionally fabricative centers. So they have a really big center in Florida. They have one in Arizona that kind of covers the coasts. And then they have, so I think that is, I think it's a great move. But the other thing is it also integrates them vertically, right? That's kind of like the buzzword for a lot of these companies that are taken private, is this vertical integration, because now they also own SPS, which is a distributor of prosthetic parts. And
Mm-hmm.
so now you've got some of the fabrication. Now you're distributing prosthetic parts. You've
Mm-hmm.
got some 3D printing, even though they're not strong in that space there. I know that it's coming. And then you've got this patient care stuff. So they really have everything in house, which starts getting very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, and we talk about insurance a lot on the podcast. I don't know if it's incidental or not, but Cigna, the insurance company, gave all their risk to an insurance company that Hanger owned called Linkia.
Okay.
Well, but from what I understand is that Cigna has actually opened up their request for other companies to come in because Hanger is now private. And so that's a very interesting thing for regional players and small players, is that you might be able to hop in their network if you want to.
Yeah, but I think that's a logical thing for them to see, instead of like all of a sudden the insurer has pricing power, right? The little guy is not going to say anything. They can't afford to get kicked out of one of the bigger insurers. Now all of a sudden they're dealing with a company that has maybe some pricing power that can have some pushback, or that could deal with a lot of volume for the insurer, which could be much better for it. Because, oh, right, these guys could deal with a third of our stuff. So I think that could. I mean, that doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh wow, let's welcome the little guy. It could just be a negotiation, right? You know what I mean? It could be these two big guys saying, oh wait, there's more than one gorilla in the room. Let's show who's boss.
Well, and that's true. And one of the things that, and I've heard all kinds of stories about being able to have a seat at the table with the insurance companies. And one of the interesting things that may or may not happen, I would think that it probably does, is we've heard some of the other clinicians talk about how hard it is to get paid for something, or insurance companies holding up claims for whatever. So with Hanger having 800 plus offices nationwide, you can imagine that if they have some denials or some money being held up, you start talking about millions and millions of dollars that get
Yeah.
held up. Well, now they can come to the insurance company and say, hey, listen, you've got about $4 million in claims that's owed to us. How
Mhm.
about this? Why don't you write us a check for $3.9 million
Not sure if that'll
right
work.
now? And then the insurance company loves it because they just saved $100,000. Hanger loves it because they just bolstered their bottom line.
No,
I'm not
it
saying
would
that
reduce
that
our
does
revenue.
happen.
No, it would reduce our revenue.
Yes, but
Yeah.
what happens is that you've
Yeah.
got this cash flow that's been held up. So would you
Yeah.
rather wait another 6 months for $4 million, or would you like to have 3.9 right now?
Okay, that's a really interesting discussion for a lot of like CFO types to look into. I'm not sure. I think that's speculative. I think it does, but we do know that it gives them price. Now they have pricing power against insurer, and with the vertical integration, we would expect them to have better margins on these devices, and maybe even be able to optimize them. Right. So like from their cash position, their profitability per operation, if you will, or per treatment, is going to be high, and their cost could be very low as well, right? So, do you think that's going to be a problem for the little guy, if you will?
It's going to be interesting. I think these sorts of acquisitions are going to push the little guy to get to have a process into 3D printing. So I know we've talked to Spenties, and we're going to be talking to and we talked to Arthur, who's big into the 3D side of things, and we've talked to PVA Medical and all those. I think these mom and pops and small regional players are really going to look hard at some of these companies that have digital tools packaged together and try to create their own vertical integration, right? Even though it's mini, but they're going to use these tools, digital tools, to drive their costs down so they can compete at a high level with Hanger. And the thing with the big companies, and everybody will say this, is that those ships are hard to move. Even when they're private, it's a ship that's hard to move because it's a risk adverse company, especially when you're talking about this big of a company. And so the little guys still have an advantage as long as they're willing to put themselves out a little bit, especially into the space. And they might find that this digital workflow and this kind of close-knit community, especially if we start collaborating together, will give a competitive advantage against larger company like Hanger.
Yeah, but also I think that it would be a really opportune moment to launch some kind of master fabricator service, like a kind of like US wide, either with shipping or whatever kind of fabrication service that does more of what, well, it does a lot of the stuff that people now do in house. It could do on demand, and maybe not everything, maybe some of the 3D printing, maybe some of the cutting, maybe some of the manufacturing. Like that to me seems a brilliant kind of like counterweight to this, to say, look, we'll fabricate a lot of the stuff you're doing, and we'll save you money, and you can get a lot of these components. We'll even give you these cool branded components, but then for less, that kind of thing,
That's absolutely. And then even in the digital space, you get some of this custom components, and then you might not be buying off the shelf components. So you're getting components that you actually need that are digitally designed and cost effective, and you're not buying stuff that's off the shelf. You're just going to have a switch of like how manufacturing changes within the O&P space.
Yeah. And what about these component manufacturers? Because all of a sudden they've got this hanger that either could be their biggest client ever, right? But on the same hand, hanger could just all of a sudden say, oh, you make that one joint, or you make that boa thing, or you make that liner, or whatever specialized kind of thing. We're going to do that in-house now, right? So it's like there's a partner and a threat kind of thing going on, right?
Yeah, 100%. But I think one of the things that's interesting is since they own this distribution network, that's actually probably one of the largest profit centers of the whole company, is this distribution where you're ordering stuff and marking it up and sending it out to sometimes your competitors or Hanger itself, and so you're selling to yourself, you're selling to your competitors. That's a gravy
This is like
train.
a mini McKeeson kind of thing. What is it?
It's it's like a gravy train that you don't want to stop, right? So, okay, so let's just say SPS, and we've talked about Oser and Autobach before. Well, SPS sells Oser and Autobach parts.
Okay.
Well, if you go, manufacture, let's just say a liner that's a Hanger branded liner or whatever, and you undercut one of these suppliers, you may not have access to other parts of their portfolio that you want. So there is a tendency, I would say, is to figure out how do you play nice in that space to where you continue this idea of distribution and that sort of thing, while in the collaborative spirit, ultimately keeping the patient at the center, right? Obviously, we've got to make money, but the patient and patient outcomes at the center. And I tell you, the leadership at Hanger has been impressive. I've had a chance to talk with Vinit a time or two, and a super genuine guy, and really cares about the health of our industry, but then also the outcomes of patients. And I know Hanger's had some rocky times, but that is filtering down through what I see at Hanger as far as the people involved and such. And so I look at it as a very positive thing as far as them being a part of this community. They're going to obviously keep their secrets, and they're going to get better pricing and that sort of thing, but they do want people to be successful ultimately for great patient outcomes.
Okay, well, that would be good. But so, okay, imagine I'm like a smaller guy, like the BOA guys, the guys that make those fittings, those closure devices that I like so much. Like, imagine I'm those kind of guys, like medium player. Like, is this also so great to me? Because to me, it sounds like a really scary thing. If I have a distributor that's a big user of my product, that all of a sudden can also distribute me, buy my product, or compete with me and come up with a competing product, right? For these kind of guys, am I only a threat, or do you think I'm also going to be beneficial to the hanger ecosystem as well?
I think it comes down to now that Hanger has been taken private,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's how, if you're a part of their portfolio or say you sell to Hanger,
Mm-hmm.
these investors want to create a company that's profitable, and they want to have a certain multiplier, whatever that is, to either sell off or put into another portfolio. So the real answer to all that is, what is their value add that ultimately adds to the bottom line of
Mm-hmm.
profitability of Hanger? And so if I'm stepping back and taking a look, my play would be, hey, I've got this widget gidget thing that works for the patient.
Mm-hmm.
It saves you $20 a leg, or a prosthesis, and you multiply that out to, let's just say they fabricate 500 prostheses a day. So
Mm-hmm.
20 times 500 is 10 grand.
Mm-hmm.
And so you save 10 grand a day
Mm-hmm.
if you use my product. 10 grand
Mm-hmm.
times 50,
Mm-hmm.
50, so then you start talking about millions and millions of dollars. Well, now you start getting eyeballs. So you're telling me that this, me saving $20, gets me a better patient outcome, and I save millions of dollars a year. I'm in. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the sort of thing that people that sell to Hanger, people to sell to SPS, and these distributors have to make that kind of
Mm-hmm.
case to
Okay, okay.
really be successful.
I like that in a cooperative universe where everybody's working together. I love it. But on the other hand, we're seeing a similar situation to my mind evolved in the supermarkets, right? Where I make a particular type of kettle chips or something, which is all wonderful until the supermarket at one point decides to make like Bedell chips or some kind of like the supermarket branded version of my product, right? um,
Right.
and we see a lot of conflict arise around that, and a lot of like supermarkets kind of like piggybacking on the innovation of certain brands. The brand puts all the innovation into putting Skier or whatever new types of really cool yogurt on the shelves, right?
Hmm.
And then once it's successful, the supermarket comes up with a 20% cheaper kind of super cool like Chobani, but it isn't Chobani kind of product, right? So that could be a similar kind of situation that could develop here as well.
I would say yes and no. The cost to develop a lot of these devices in the to R&D it, to make sure that it's good to go on patients and such, is pretty
Mm-hmm.
significant, and it's a fairly big risk. So I think the play on Hanger's part would be like, hey, I really like this,
Mm-hmm.
and we could guarantee you,
Yeah.
10,000 units a year if you sell it to us at X price. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that could go very well for a manufacturer, or it could not go, could go not very
Yeah.
well, because then they could take those 10,000 units and say, well, we're just going to buy this other one that's not as good, and then cut you all the way out, and then you're left with nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, it can definitely go both ways. I think it's, um, they're going to look for the low hanging fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And so the low hanging fruit, yes, those companies are going to have a difficulty
Mm-hmm.
um, selling, because Hanger's going to want to have some control of that vertical integration. But for more complex things that require research and development, certifications, that sort of thing, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
a little bit of a stretch in the short term. Now, maybe on the long term plan, but that's where they may, reach out and do some sort of acquisition. But I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
don't ever see them acquiring like, like an Oser or Autobach or anything like that. I think
Mm-hmm.
they're just too big of different
Mm-hmm.
cultures and that sort of thing that go into that. But I do see probably some sort of things on their long term map
Mm-hmm.
to create even more vertical integration and bring stuff under their umbrella.
Well, I think so. I think what I'm worried about, I tend to be a little bit more pessimistic than you do. I think what I worry about is the fact that, imagine there's something that doesn't necessarily save labor costs or time on the hanger fabrication front or on the fitting front, right? Because I think this is it one hand, it opens up an opportunity for entrepreneurs to sell things into this hanger ecosystem that save them money either on fitting or fabrication, right? But imagine we have a new liner that takes longer to fit, but is more comfortable for the patient. Now, all of a sudden, the economics of that doesn't seem really great for somebody who's trying to kind of industrialize this entire process. So on the one hand, it could foster innovation through the ecosystem. On the other hand, it could also actually retard patient care if things are bad to develop their kind of vertical integration setup.
Right, right. And I think it varies from region to region, but I've heard it and I've traveled across the country, not only in the RV, but when I was doing other things for Coyote Design. And I hear it time and time again, having a hanger in your market is necessary.
Mhm.
They provide, it is exactly like what you said, the McDonald's. Now they're
Mhm.
doing a lot of neat things in the innovation space and high activity people, but for the most part, it's like a McDonald's. They're everywhere.
Mhm.
You know what they can bill and that sort of thing. But I've also heard people say, I love having them as my competition because you know their weaknesses.
Okay, okay.
When you talk about a corporate level person compared to even like East Point, and I'll use
Mhm.
us for an example, we don't clock out at 5 o'clock. It's not a 9 to 5 job.
Mhm.
And there's some passion, there's some fire in
Mhm.
the way we provide for our patients.
Mhm.
That level of passion doesn't necessarily get translated at a corporate level on that scale.
Mhm.
When it's 5 o'clock, you know, don't let the door hit you on the way out. And
Mhm.
that's just the way it is. And so I
Mhm.
think that's for the little guy and the medium regional player guy. You just have more passion, more fire, and that's going to
Mhm.
get you a long way.
Mhm.
And that is a competitive advantage
Yeah, but
for.
okay, I like this, right? I think this is good. This passion. I like this small entrepreneur, whatever. But that to me is if you have an articulate patient who, like we've talked about this again and again, someone who is taking this bull by the horns and taking this treatment, making it theirs, right? And owning this process, right? Owning the fact that yes, now I'm missing a lower limb, but we're going to do this, right? I have a team, right? We've talked to people who didn't have this very articulate, very in charge patients, right? For those guys, right, that are going to be like, okay, I need to assemble a team of the best in the world to get my leg to function as best as possible. Then they're going to fluctuate. They're going to move towards these smaller guys, right? But if I'm not as articulate, not as kind of more sheep than wolf, let's say,
Mhm.
or if it's my first time, like I don't even know what a process is supposed to do. I'm supposed to come to this office and I go. Those kind of guys, they don't know what to expect. So they don't know that there's a better service level out there. They don't know that there's somebody. So to me, it's like if Hanger gets the leads of the first time patients in, they're going to ultimately win this. And then it's going to be very difficult for a small player to get in that kind of system.
Oh, that's 100% true. And that's interesting when you start talking about, okay, where do those amputations happen? Well, they happen at hospitals.
Yeah,
Well, how do you get into a hospital? Well, you say, listen, I can take care of all your needs. Well, who can do that? Hanger can.
exactly.
The little guy can't necessarily do that, or you'll drown.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to be going at 2 o'clock in the morning, going and fitting a
Mm-hmm.
$50 neck collar.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't have the staff to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But Hanger can scale up to
Mm-hmm.
do that. And then they have, for lack of a better term, first right of refusal on the patient, right?
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
right there once the amputation is done, they can slip on what we call a shrinker, which is just an elastic sock,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes a protector, which is just a helmet for
Mm-hmm.
the patient to protect their leg, whether it's in the bed or protect it from falls
Mm-hmm.
right after a fresh amputation. They're right there for that, and they can go in as a national group, especially as there's consolidation among hospitals, and say, hey, listen, we can take care of this whole region if you want us to, and we have the
Mm-hmm.
the network to do that. So yes, 100% that is a possibility.
Yeah, I think that's a big risk that you don't know. Like, imagine you've only had McDonald's hamburgers, right? You've never made one yourself. You've never been to a cookout or something where somebody makes an amazing one. You've never been to like these kind of greasy spoon places, or you've never been to a gourmet kind of place. You have no idea. The hamburger is just this, right? This is a hamburger, all right? And in that universe, like there is no, you don't all of a sudden wake up one morning and conceive there's a better hamburger. You don't understand, like just like like a lot of people haven't thought of a better Coke or a better mayonnaise. It just isn't. And I think that could be a real threat to the smaller player more than just like I said, I like the idea that in a heads-on competition. Yeah, for example, I think a lot of people would be more likely to go with like the Mr. Smith or Jane's prosthetics than some kind of chain.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting thing that you say that, though. Hanger is so big, and they employ their own like social media crew and that sort of thing. And as crazy as this sounds, I mean, it's about as close to ambulance chasing as you can get.
Mm.
They're scrounging the news for somebody that's lost a leg, high profile,
Oh God.
whatever,
Right.
and because of their network, they can
Yeah.
they can get into that hospital or whatever and say, hey, we'll take care of you. And they'll send one of their celebrity prosthetists, very talented prosthetists. They have
Like they have
specialized
celebrity
prosthetists.
prosthetist.
Oh yeah.
What? We've been doing this for all this time and I don't know this, Brent. Come on, don't hold out.
It's a stair step. I'm going to try to get some of these people on the show.
Oh my
Um,
God.
but
Yeah.
you have,
What is it? What am I thinking of? Is it Carrot Top that has a sideline in prosthetics? Or
so
what are we talking about?
did you ever see that movie or see
Yeah.
the Dolphin
No.
Tale?
No, I
The
have
one
not.
that
Sorry.
there's a story about a dolphin that was missing a tail, and one
Oh
of
God,
Hanger's
no. No.
prosthetists went
No.
and made a tail for it. And he's a fantastic prosthetist. I love the guy.
Yeah.
I worked
Yeah.
with him when in
Yeah.
residency, and he's super talented.
Mhm.
And he goes around the country literally helping. The mere mortal prosthetists do some very difficult things.
Yeah.
But
That's a good idea, by the way. As a large company, you have like an expert
well,
person,
they have like
Sally
experts.
driving around, giving her like super expertise to everyone, right?
It's 100%, and it's great to have that kind of expertise. But so all I'm saying with there are literally people that are looking for news stories, looking for ways, PR opportunities,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're a local company, even if you're embedded locally, and something like that happens and a patient would normally come to you, Hanger may come in and scoop them up just by the sheer network and ability to kind of spin the PR, so to speak,
Okay, but
on
this
that.
makes me think that they aren't as far along with 3D printing as you think then, because this like we know I happen to know from 3dprint.com, like we can write about like we can break news, we can be the first to analyze something and come up with stuff, but if we were really only doing the website for like just views, right, page views, we would just write about like prosthetics and pets all day long.
Oh yeah,
3D printed legs for pets is like seriously, it's insane. You could spend like weeks breaking a story and being like the first there, or you could just write about like some like you said, like a dolphin or a cockatoo or like squirrel or something missing a leg, and then boom, it's like the biggest article you wrote that year.
And so about the 3D printing side of things, though, with Hanger, it's very interesting because they're in a tough spot with 800 clinics nationwide, literally hundreds of legs being delivered a day. Let's just say you have a fabrication facility that is 3D printing these legs, and for whatever reason you get a bad batch of powder.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're literally recalling hundreds and hundreds of legs that could potentially fail. You have to have the labor to go actually see the patient, switch that out. You've got the material cost on top of all that. And so there is a massive risk to making the switch to 3D printing. Do I think there's an opportunity? 100%. But I totally get the skittish nature that they have around that.
No, but if we're gonna like start, let's call them a Starbucks of this to be nice. And McDonald's sounds a bit mean, maybe I think. But if they want to Starbucksify this, right? Then they do need to standardize stuff, right? They can't. They do need to use like one size fits nearly all kind of solutions in terms of like the machines, in terms of the processes they use. They can't have people like winging it, because that's a disaster for such a company. And I do think that's the one thing that makes me hopeful, just like what you said before, that as a smaller player, you can give that local service, that local kind of top spin, that local kind of like different kind of passion thing. I think that then, that's when it makes sense.
Yeah, I think you're right. We shouldn't have said McDonald's. Starbucks is probably the right way to go. And what's funny is that you have your Starbucks fans, and then you've got your kind of indie flavor
Yeah,
people, and
exactly. Yeah.
they it's for different people. So
Also for different times. I used to spend like this is crazy, but I would go to work by train at one point for like a year, and I would every day buy a caramel macchiato for like this is insane for €5.50 in Holland at the time, right? So I was spending like over €100 a month on Starbucks coffee, which is $1,000 a year.
oh my goodness, yeah, yeah.
Right? So it's much more expensive in Europe, but I think maybe it is, right? So that was me at that point. It's crazy if you think of all the calories and stuff I took every day. And then at one point, I fell out of love with that. And now I'm like one of those, I'm horrible. Like I'm a coffee nerd guy. I'm like, all like, oh no, these are third wave coffee. I'm like that kind of person. Right? I'm terrible. And I'm like, oh, I needed like shade grown, Ethiopian. Oh, Harar is lovely, but I'm really more into cinema. I'm not going to do it, right? So you kind of also evolve, and I think as patients, I think they can evolve as well. You can have different preferences. You could kind of become more, demanding, for example.
Yeah, yeah. And by the way, that's another reason why you're going to have to go to Guatemala with us, because they win the
Yeah,
coffee Olympics, and they're
yeah,
depending on which region you are, it's different
yeah,
acidity.
yeah.
But this is a complete side note and rabbit trail.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to have to tell you about this coffee place, and I'll bring you some of this back if you don't come.
Okay, okay, okay.
So there's a guy that does the coffee drying, and I don't know anything about coffee, but apparently
Yeah.
what he does is different than anybody else. He actually doesn't cut the bean or the skin off the bean. He actually
Okay.
dries it full, and apparently the gelatin or the protective layer around the
Yeah.
coffee bean gets absorbed into the bean. It's an old Mayan process for doing this coffee.
Okay.
He does like 1,050-pound bags a year, and that's
Yeah.
it. And
Okay.
the only way that you can get this is literally it's this hardware store that's in the middle of nowhere. You go
Very
back
nice.
to this chain link gate and
Mhm.
you say, I need some of the stuff that's in the gold bag.
Uh,
And here it comes out.
love this.
And supposedly it's amazing. My
Uh,
sisters are big coffee nerds, and
uh,
they think it's the best
okay, you need to
coffee.
get this for me because okay, so
Okay.
just so you know, if you're listening, like I don't know, your coffee comes as a cherry. It's like it literally looks like a cherry, and then the outside is actually discarded quite early in the process, and then the rest is dried and washed and processed. So this is a very different way to how everyone else is doing it. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So yes, get
So
me some, and yes, I should go to Guatemala. I know this already. I do.
we'll turn the
Uh,
air conditioner on for you.
oh God, no, I'm kind of. See, the thing is, like now I'm not hardy, right? And but before I was traveling in all sorts of out of the way places and all sorts of like semi dangerous places, and so I can be hardy. I have a hardy mode,
Well,
but
I don't know
now
how
I'm
we
like,
got on that from Hanger, but there we go. So,
yeah. Oh, one more thing I do want to ask before we close the topic. I think
yeah.
one thing is okay. Imagine we've talked about all the players in the industry, kind of, but imagine I'm like an Oser or Autobot, right? What do I do with this, right? Do I just sit back and watch these guys grow and kind of maybe muscle in on my space, or do I work with them as best I can, obviously, right? But what's the play for companies like that have pricing power, that have distribution, that have a considerable presence and a considerable R&D dollars? What does this mean for them?
It's a tough space for both of them because they
Mhm.
rely. I mean, Hanger at least makes up 33% of all the clinics nationwide.
Wow.
And so you have to sell to those people
Hmm.
to be profitable, to get stuff to the bottom line. So I think, you do that through a couple ways. One is education. You want the other, and then doubling down on your independent and regional players.
Hmm.
If for whatever reason that relationship was to go south or sour or what have you, you have to know that you're a lock on these others. So I think it's an interesting time. The other part that's curious, and we don't have to jump into this, is that Ottobock and Oser are also in patient care,
I
and
didn't know that
so
even. Yeah.
yeah, and Ottobock's been in it for a while. They've just been it as a quote unquote silent partners, but it was just a few years ago that somehow it got out that they were kind of partnering or injecting cash into specific practices. And so now it's out in the open, and they're buying practices and such. So it's just it is a curious time, and people want to control this vertical. But for all our listeners, there's not a more perfect time to become involved in digital stuff. And that is a great way to control your own vertical, your own costs, your own relationships. And one of the best ways that we can do that is not only providing great service at a great price, but one of the controls that we have is how much does a prosthesis cost us to make? And if we can create this amazing product specifically in 3D printing for a lower cost than traditional fabrication, or even a lateral move, but you cut out some of those players, you're going to be in a better spot for the long run.
Cool, man. I agree. I think it's wonderful. All right, Brent, thank you so much. Brent, thank you so much for listening. My name is Joris Peels, and this is Brent Wright and myself on the Prosthetics and Orthotics podcast. Tell everyone you know about us, and thank you so much for all the wonderful feedback you've been giving us. Thank you.